Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar where we'll be thinking particularly about the importance of EdTech evidence in the world, the current pandemic, the issue of lots of kids out of school. The educational world is in turmoil right now, and there's no doubt that the eyes of the world are on educational technology and how it's both helping the current situation, but most importantly, how we learn from this experience so that we are better prepared in the future. So I'm delighted to be sharing this panel, this series of panels on behalf of the EdTech Evidence Group, and we'll be looking at some of the reasons why EdTech evidence is now more important than ever. So we have three themes to be considering. One is around the future of EdTech post-COVID. What is the educational world going to look like? What does it mean to have enough evidence for EdTech? And what sort of evidence should different stakeholders be looking for? And if you're a successful EdTech company and you've already got a platform that works and lots of data and children look like they're making progress, why do you need evidence? Why does it matter? So the particular context here around this urgent need for evidence-informed EdTech and well-researched EdTech has led us to convene the three panels. And I'm going to introduce the first panel to you now. We have Justin Smith, investor and CEO of Educational App Store. We have Matt Costa-Marcon, founder and CEO of Learning Ladders Education. And we have Colin Hegarty, a fellow maths teacher and founder of CEO of Hegarty Maths. So very warm welcome to you, Matt, Justin and Colin. And I'd love to start by just asking you to say a little bit about yourselves and your particular company, product or suite of products. And so our first question, which is really thinking about, from your perspective, how is COVID-19 affecting the EdTech industry as you see it in your company, in your position right now? So let's go over to Colin first, because I've got a hunch that there's quite a lot of interest in Hegarty Maths right now, Colin. So please, how's it affecting Hegarty Maths, and tell us a little bit about it.
Thanks, Alison. So just to say, founder and CEO of Hegarty Maths and also the Education and Schools Director of Sparks Learning. How has it affected the EdTech industry as far as I see it, Alison? We're incredibly busy. So at first, what we needed to do is we tried to figure out what our schools, students and teachers needed from us and be very flexible and adaptable. Whilst we all have a strong default positions about what our systems do for children, in the case of Hegarty and Sparks, we changed students' lives through practice and math practice. We had to figure out how to make that work in sort of a different environment. So what that's meant is a lot of discussion and dialogue with our teachers and schools to try and make sure that we build and innovate upon our systems to make it as useful as possible to those to the people who need our support, and also it's been an incredible increase in usage and slightly different usage as well, Alison. A lot of our systems are getting used to deliver learning in replacement of what might have happened in a normal classroom environment, whereas notoriously, normally, should I say, Hegarty and Sparks is more of can be a practice tool outside that environment. So a complete change and adapting to help out our schools and students as best as we possibly can.
And just a follow-up question there, Colin. We know about Joe Wicks is the PE teacher for the nation. What are the usage figures like? We're dying to know.
Usage figures, yeah. So usage figures of Hegarty like times by 4 or 5 in this time. So I tried to do a bit of Joe Wicks myself. I've not got the same body or anything to that effect, but I was doing live lessons myself, and I think we reached about 200,000 students tuning into the live lessons. So not to Joe Wicks standard, but a good standard, I still think.
Lovely, thank you. And moving to Justin next. Justin, your take on how COVID-19's impacting on the EdTech industry right now.
Hi, Alison. Hi, everyone. Well, the Educational App Store focuses primarily on educational apps that will support primary and elementary learning. We've had the opportunity to see on a global scale how this COVID has affected not only teachers but also parents that are homeschooling. I'd like to say, on the whole, I think it's been out of every crisis comes an opportunity, and I think for educational technology that is the case. I think education tech has been always a compromise rather than a must-have. And I think since the acceleration of COVID and the need for children and pupils to learn at home, I think it's come to the fore. So I think it's been a major accelerator so far.
Thank you. And moving to Matt.
Hello, everybody. So Matt from Learning Ladders. We at Learning Ladders, for those of you not familiar, is a platform that primary schools in the main use to support homeschool communications. And we have embedded within the system hundreds of tutorials specifically explaining to parents how to help learning at home. So you can imagine we were quite busy. So I'd kind of echo Colin's thoughts. We've not attempted to do the live lessons. It's not really our space. We wouldn't tread on that. But we've seen some schools, regular customers who've been using it for a while, their usage stats have literally gone 50-fold as they're pushing everything through the platform. Every single lesson has gone through the platform, particularly international schools. We've noticed a lot of that, but some UK schools as well. So I think in terms of the question, has it been a positive experience for EdTech companies? It's been extremely busy. I think the challenge for a lot of companies like us is we've decided to give away a lot of our products for free. So one of my other jobs is I chair EdTech at BISA, the Trade Association for British companies. And the Trade Association has estimated that companies have given away something in the order of £37 million worth of free stuff over the last few months. So some of the figures coming out are absolutely astonishing. So I think, yeah, generally speaking, obviously, as you'd expect me to say, I think EdTech has been a really good thing. And I always say to people, just imagine the scenario over the last 3 months. If you haven't had all the EdTech products, how would you have managed without the Hegartys of this world, without the online learning platforms and that kind of stuff? But is it sustainable, and have those choices been made with long-term objectives in mind? And that is really going to be the next stage that I think we really need to look at.
Yeah, thank you very much. So let's move on to that. I mean, a couple of you touched on sort of negative impacts or some of the unintended consequences. I mean, one of the big ones that's clearly worrying governments around the world is access and the inequities around children, actually having any opportunities to engage with EdTech. In terms of thinking about the negative impacts and where next, can I come to you first, Colin? I mean, on the roadmap, as you see it, how do you convert all of this extra use into sustained business for Hegarty and Sparks? You're still on mute, Colin.
The phrase of lockdown, you're still on mute, and I fell for it. Have we had a positive or negative impact during this time? I think that if I'm being totally honest, we don't know, right? We don't know, because that's the whole point about impact and evidence. Unless we do the research, we won't absolutely know. But what we can say is that technologies and platforms that are built with evidence and research in mind, if they have enabled students to have effective learning in this time, then that should be a good thing if they were designed in that way. And in terms of how we've converted that in Hegarty and Sparks, Alison, with Hegarty in particular, other than the live lessons, we just made sure we didn't offer Hegarty for free. So we didn't actually, our usage didn't increase because we had more people. Our usage increased because people used our system in a different way. In Sparks, we did build specific technologies and products to brand new, like I'm talking brand new products we built, and they scaled to sort of 80 countries and hundreds of schools. And now the schools have seen some of the benefits of that usage and are becoming paid users now, because some of our other products in a school-based system, they're looking towards those because it's helped out so much in this time.
Mm-hmm. So the jury's still out on the evidence, but you're obviously sitting on a shed load of data to analyse at some point. Interesting. So moving on to Matt, I mean, what the future, again, you touched on the need for sustainable models here. How's it affecting you, and how do you see it more widely?
I mean, we were very upfront from the beginning that we could sustain a free model until for the rest of the academic year, and that was always front and center of everybody. So everyone's aware of that, and that's fine for us. That was always our decision to do that. I think the interesting thing as well, touching on Colin's point, is one of the things that we did quite quickly was talk to our existing schools, run loads of webinars, run loads of events, and try and understand what their needs were going to be. And on the basis of that, we changed our product roadmap quite significantly, and we pushed out, for example, automated digital end-of-year reports, which in a primary setting is still statutory for the majority of territories we work with, and is at the best of times an absolute nightmare for most schools to do. It was in our roadmap for next year. We spoke to a lot of schools. They identified that as being a real pain point that we thought we could just take off their desk. So I think EdTech companies have done quite well generally in adapting their roadmaps and trying to think about getting new products out. That's quite sensible, and just carrying on that dialogue is always useful. Yeah. But really, in our space, it will depend on territories. I mean, so if a lot of people I suspect are from the UK. I, for my sins, am on the DFE's advisory board for EdTech COVID resources in the new academic year, and it's really interesting. But one of the challenges is the lack of funding. And that's going to be a real challenge moving forward, I would say. So there's a big picture, there's stuff that EdTech companies can influence, but then there's the wider, do schools have the resources to be able to make decisions based on efficacy and getting the product they actually want, or are they having to choose possibly products they might not choose, for other reasons? So that would be something I would focus on.
Yeah, and moving to Justin, the final word on these questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So the future, Justin, what's your take on it? Okay, Justin's just frozen for a moment. So in that case, I'm going to move over to Merrin, who is sitting behind the scenes. Thank you, Merrin. I think you may well have some questions for us. I'm hoping they're going to appear on the screen. And hopefully there'll be some questions coming. I mean, one of the questions that I'm definitely going to be asking is the roadmap for research, in terms of, literally, where's the point in all of this madness to just press pause and think about how EdTech companies should be taking advantage of this huge surge in their data, and how they might then be able to at least draw us some evidence to get some idea of the impacts of what's going on. So I don't know, are there any global things going on either in the EdTech Evidence Group that might be interesting here? But how should companies approach leveraging that data that they're sitting on right now? What's your plan, Matt?
Thanks for picking me for that nice, easy question there, Alison. I really appreciate that one. And Justin, I'll get you back for turning off your internet at a critical time. From our point of view, I mean, obviously Learning Ladders is an assessment and evaluation platform. So a big part of what we do is enabling schools to evaluate certain actions. So most obviously, how they implement and how they teach their curriculum, how they manage remote learning, how they manage interventions, and all that kind of stuff. So I think from our point of view, we'll obviously be able to track certain actions within new schools and different schools, and we're already doing some work around looking in the UK at schools who switched to the platform, tracking their available statutory data before and after, and we're able to sort of show a correlation in upturn. And that's nothing to do with a sort of magic technology, that's just a change in attitude and using the system to do it. I think in terms of using the data that we've got, I think what's been really interesting is from a product development point of view, we now know under these particular circumstances where people are really using the platform, and it will be very interesting to understand if schools go back, as everyone's hoping, in August, September, where teachers are physically in front of their class again in the main, rather than sat at a computer, how that usage changes and how possibly we can build upon that. So that's how we'll be using our data internally. It's a slightly different one for a product like Learning Ladders, which is so all-encompassing within a school and does so much. It's always difficult for us to sort of, narrow down different areas. But that's what we're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing, in the same way, responding to schools wanting end-of-year reports, is there a role for companies giving a bit of a dashboard back to the schools when you do that analysis on a school-by-school basis to help the schools to make sense of it, because they equally don't have time to stop and think, oh gosh, we turn to that tool in that moment of crisis, but actually, what can we learn from the impact that it has? So I think, it leads nicely into the question that I've just seen pop up in the the chat there, which is, what is the role of parents here in actually, driving either EdTech engagement or being part of that whole story that's going on right now. So do you have visibility of parents in your systems, Colin, or are you working through schools? I mean, schools and teachers predominantly.
Yeah, in Hegarty we work predominantly with schools and teachers, but as part of our work with Nesta, we're actually looking into how to engage the parents more, because obviously in this environment the parent could be a key driver of usage and support that usage. Within Sparks we have functionality to engage with the parent, and that's something we're monitoring and seeing how the effect of that during lockdown, because the teachers are doing a great job of communicating and talking to their children. It's unbelievable the learning that schools and teachers have done in this time. But when you can make that connection with the parent, there's something very powerful as well there. So that's something we're actively looking at in Sparks as well.
Justin, are you hearing us? I think you might be on mute. Okay, we have another question which says, Matt's talked about the capacity schools might have to assess the impact of the EdTech they've used. What does the panel think that the companies can do to help? So, Justin, are you able to come in on that one? Because we touched on that in the discussion that whilst we lost you.
Yeah, I do apologise. I'm working remotely in northern Spain and the internet dropped out. So I do apologise.
Sorry for you, Justin.
Yeah, it's not doesn't always go to plan. I'm sorry, Alice. Question. I will answer it. What was it?
It's about the capacity of schools to actually assess the impact of the EdTech that they've used through EdTech, and what can companies do to help?
Well, I think we do need to work with the schools to provide them with learning and training materials, because a lot of the schools are very new into this space, and they are going to need digital ancillary support, and that support may not just come in the form of technology, but it may also come in the form of training online on a regular basis, because you can't just give someone technology and expect them to be able to use it. And I think with this acceleration, that is one of the most important things. But it's not about technology for technology's sake. It's also about the support that you can provide to the individual when they use technology for the first time. And I think all the EdTech companies that are out there that are realizing that they can get their product adopted, they need to realize also there's a service element to the product as well.
Thank you. And we're coming to the end of the talk. Great, we've got another question there. So we've got a couple of minutes left. What kind of data are people looking for? So specific pre-post data on each learning objective, scores on standardized tests, or something in between? Thank you, Don. So let's go to Colin on this one first. So what's your take on the sort of data that you might want to be presenting evidence about?
Yeah, so I think that what schools will want to do is have a clear oversight of what usage has been happening in the various platforms, and often can that indicate particular worries of students that are disengaged and hard to reach. The schools I've spoken to have sort of said that the children that might be hard to reach in ordinary homework practice have suddenly become very, very hard to reach, and being able to identify that. I also think what schools will need now very likely is they need to determine what the gaps, the knowledge gaps in children's brains are. So, and that's a very difficult thing at the best of times, right? But when you haven't seen those children for a long period of time, it's going to require some serious thinking, because that will enable teachers to figure out what they're doing with students when and if schools, come back. So I think there's going to be something important there about knowledge. To what extent do the systems show what knowledge has been learnt / retained to influence what you do with children going forward?
Yeah, no, very interesting point. And Matt, would you like to comment on data you think schools find most useful in this context?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously, again, we do this kind of stuff as a normal practice. I think actually for a lot of schools, what they'll be looking at to start with is just to evaluate the relationships they've had with their existing suppliers. Has it worked for them under these really challenging scenarios? So it'll be quite a lot of softer side stuff, I would suggest, to start with. And what we're seeing already is lots of people coming through, finding, interested in our product because their existing providers haven't quite lived up to their expectations, and maybe it's time to move on. So there's quite a lot of evaluation going on at the moment, I think, and it's incumbent upon us as companies to make that information as readily available as possible. So as a group here, the people who are organising this today, we've been working quite hard in the background to think about how we can do that on our individual platforms, how we can help other people do that in their platforms and signpost and resources. So there's a lot of stuff going on in that area. I think it's probably early days. We still don't know what's likely to happen in the future. So I think a lot of schools are still battling day-to-day issues. Most of the schools that I know are still caught up in how am I going to manage a bubble of 15 children wandering around and eating at lunchtime and going to the toilet and this, that, and stuff, rather than getting too into the weeds of a detailed EdTech evaluation would be my sum. But I think we need to help them when they get there.
Yeah, and be ready there. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Well, been a really interesting panel discussion. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Colin, and thank you, Matt, for your contributions. Please keep any questions going in the chat there, because certainly our panelists are very keen to pick up with people on particular questions afterwards. So let's move on to the next panel. And in this one, we're actually going to be looking more specifically into the nature of evidence for EdTech, what enough evidence might look like. And if you are a user of EdTech, if you're a purchaser of EdTech, if you're a parent, a teacher, a school making decisions, what sort of evidence might you be looking for and for what purposes? So on that note, I'd like to welcome, we've got Dan, we've got Michael, and we've got Anthony joining us for this panel. And I'd like to start by giving you a minute to introduce yourself. Just wait for, I saw Dan and then he disappeared again, so we'll just wait for Dan to come back. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, introduce your company, organisation and what you do, and at the same time give your take on some of the realistic ways that EdTech companies can go about collecting the sort of evidence that you think is needed out there. So let me go to Anthony first. Hello, Anthony.
Hi, thank you very much, Alison. I'm Anthony Coxon, one of the founders of GCSE Pod. GCSE Pod is the leading resource in secondary for content assessment, tracking and monitoring. We have a selection of over 6,000 pods that students watch, and we also run self-assessment through our new product called Check and Challenge.
Thank you very much. And from your perspective, what are some of the ways that you think EdTech companies, and maybe you like to talk about your own company specifically, go about collecting evidence of your products or their products' effectiveness, and how do you go about it?
So from a start point, we use the school's data. So we use the we provide a if you like a template into which the schools put their data, typically progress aids data, attainment aids data, coupled with predicted attainment grades. And we then overlay that with GCSE Pod usage, and that then gives a picture to the school as to where students are and how the product is making a difference, depending on which group a student might fall into, whether it's a higher attainment, low usage, or lower attainment, higher usage, and how that product is influencing the outcomes that the students are seeing, and obviously the teachers and schools are seeing.
That's interesting. So for you, a role for EdTech companies is almost providing data evaluation as part of your service to schools in terms of returning them data and information about effectiveness or usage. That's very interesting. Moving to Michael, what should the companies be doing? How should they go about it? And please introduce EdTech Impact.
Thanks, Alison. Michael Forshaw. I'm the founder and CEO of Innovate My School. Some people might have heard of. Now 10 years old, which is a community of teachers, school leaders, and suppliers sharing how they innovate in their school. And then I also run EdTech Impact, which is schools, a global search engine for finding the best EdTech products that exist, all the way from startup to SMEs, to multinationals. And from the supplier side, really simply helping them listen to their customers and build trust through collecting consistent reviews that are wrapped around impact. So collecting reviews around the outcomes that the company cares about, which is ultimately what it's all about. Impact is ROI for schools. So let's build as much content and evidence as we can around those outcomes. What can they do? I think as a start, obviously, I'm in a position where I look at a lot of EdTech company websites. I've looked at a lot over the last few months, I'll tell you. And, you know, it's interesting. I think as a very basic start, they should have an evidence page. Like, just have a place where it all exists. You know, don't have case studies or random testimonials from Joe Blogs dotted around. Be as transparent as you possibly can about what you have. We went through, so EdTech Impact has just under 1,400 products now. We've gone from 200 to 600 companies in the last 12 weeks engaging with us to collect reviews. And when we've looked at and audited all these companies, 25% of them don't even have a privacy policy page. You know, I couldn't believe it. Like, we were trying to make transparent links to all the privacy policies because data is a big thing. It's important. It builds trust when procuring a new provider you've never heard of before. And so if they haven't got a privacy policy, chances are they don't have an evidence page or anything about evidence. So I think as a start, being as transparent as possible. I was on a webinar yesterday for Trustpilot, and it was really interesting because they gave us great stats after loads of research that actually when your evidence or your reviews are 100% and all you show is ultra positive stuff, it's really not that believable or trustworthy. And actually, when you're not perfect and then you are transparent around that and you show that you respond to that and you respond to your customers on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, then actually they're 3 times more likely to stay with you and trust you and build a better relationship. So I think building that feedback loop with your customers and collecting and listening to them as frequently as you can is a really good start.
Thank you, Michael. And moving on to Dan, please introduce yourself, Dan, and be interesting to know if we could move the discussion on a little bit around the nature of evidence and what sort of evidence you think it's realistic for EdTech companies to collect at their different stages of development.
Hi, Alison. Yeah, so I'm Dan Sandy. I'm the CEO of Sparks, and Sparks Learning includes Sparks Maths, Hegarty Maths, and Numerize. And we're obviously focused on mathematics. We've got a fairly big footprint in the UK, a lot of work internationally, and most recently we've launched a pilot Numerize, which is a parent-facing product working around independent learning. So I think from an evidence point of view, I think it's really it's around making sure there's levels of skepticism from the schools and the learners, wherever they are, about the products they use. I think we set up the EdTech Evidence Group primarily to make sure that was at the forefront of our mind. How do we educate everyone to have the right level of skepticism? Anecdotes, as Michael's saying, it's nice to have anecdotes and case studies, etc. But publish the research. We decided a long time ago, and Sparks was set up 10 years ago on the basis of doing a lot of research and publishing that research, and it's available on our website as we've all come together to demonstrate those values. It's about depth. It's not about anecdotes. It's not about the rah-rah or the smoke and mirrors. It's really easy to get up on stage and do a lot of smoke and mirrors. And one of the purposes of this forum and this engagement we're having from great colleagues in the industry, and as you can imagine, a lot of us are competitors with each other, but we are still together, sat around the table to make sure this happens. And our advice to new edtechs and edtech industries is publish your research, be open, be absolutely transparent. We're not selling cans of beans here. We're selling something which can have a negative educational impact if it's not demonstrated and evidenced properly. So for us, that's the ultimate piece. In terms of gathering that evidence, I think the advice is have that baked into your product, baked into the mindset. Gathering, publishing evidence is not a marketing event. It's not to make yourself look pretty or raise funding. It's not like putting AI on a presentation so the VC gives you money because they think AI is fancy. It's around making sure you're demonstrating to yourselves and to the learners that what you are delivering, what they are using, is backed by research and evidence and will make the outcome and make the difference. I think that's really most important. Honesty, integrity, because I think that's what we should all expect of each other, and that's definitely what schools should expect from us as providers.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to just push the panelists a little bit on this point because we're throwing the word evidence around. and we've mentioned anecdotal evidence, but if we drill in a bit deeper, I mean, my experience working on the Educate project at the Institute of Education at UCL, where we work with 250 companies, was, you know, there's some basic research training, basic research methods that's helpful for EdTech entrepreneurs and team members to be aware of, because otherwise it is this sort of mysterious thing that goes on in universities, or you need a highly qualified researcher inside your company to be able to get on this path, when as a young company you definitely don't have resources to put that way. So I mean, the sort of evidence, Michael, that appears in the EdTech Impact site that companies put up, what sort of flavors is it?
All the way from anecdotal testimonials, reviews, up to RCTs, randomized control trials. I mean, yeah, we could debate all night as to what the best form of evidence is, and Dan's right. Ultimately, we should all aspire to have that body of in-depth research, but we have to be practical as well. Like, what can companies do today? And I think, yeah, it's about understanding your conditions of success. So, like Dan mentioned, listening to your customers on a daily, weekly basis, being involved, co-creating with them. I mean, I imagine the conditions for success are drastically different now, given what's just happened with COVID. So really, do you know how they're using your product, and in what context? Is it blended? Is it not? So yeah, in terms of your question, it varies. Most people fall, if we took perhaps the Nesta levels of evidence as a scale to perhaps use, so level 1 being testimonials, level 2 being lots of testimonials, and maybe there's a correlation because now we're starting to gather lots of that, but there's no causation. Level 3, you've actually done some scientific. No one really gets beyond level 3 in EdTech, and there's 5 levels. So I think, yeah, just supporting people. Most people are at level 1, by the way. So how do we, is every company going to have randomized control trials? No, but I think they should be understanding the conditions of their success. And it very simply, it could just be working with their schools and getting them to ask some basic questions like, what worked well today? What went wrong? Which students had difficulty? Why? What will you do differently next time? I noticed someone asked a question about pre and post assessments. That'd be amazing. If the school knows how to do that, and we can teach them how to collect that data. Again, it's all open. We're asking for school level data. We're asking for the teachers who have high workloads to collect pre and post data. It's always going to vary how they do that, but I think that's a good start. Like educating your customers on how to collect the data and really baking that into your existing.
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, and I've been around the industry for about 30 years, watching companies sort of aspire to the RCT goal, and that, for people who aren't aware of that, that means that you're really looking to design a study that proves without any doubt that your intervention caused students to attain in a better way or have a better level of motivation or whatever your measures are. One of the big issues in the EdTech industry is no one's product is stable enough for the period of time needed to conduct a robust RCT. You want to start putting in tweaks, and then suddenly the landscape changes. And so for EdTech companies, it's quite a big risk, if you like, to go down that line if you don't have an incredibly stable product with all the pieces in place that are going to help you to generate evidence that's worth having. So thinking about, let me just bring Anthony in here. Obviously, with a GCSE focused product, you do have some really standard data in the National Pupil Database in England and in other national level databases. Do you draw down on that data? You mentioned getting contextual information from the schools, but have you gone down the line of actually using nationally available data to help you to at least make some comparative studies between schools you work with?
We haven't done that. It is something we're looking at doing, a deeper level study. I think in the experience you've got, you've come across products that have done that deeper level study. It's not something that we're doing at the moment. It's something that we are looking at because with an excess of now, I think we're north of 1,600 schools in secondary. There's quite a big body of schools there where we push out the ability for them to run the data against the template that we have that will help them. So I think just coming back to the point that Michael made, it's absolutely about finding the right way of gathering the evidence that is right for your audience, and that is right. So we know the evidence that works for secondary schools, and the stuff that means something to them moves their dial, as well as being right for your business. If you go and do, in the rare occasions you do an RCT, and in the main, the medical industry is sort of set the benchmark on that, because when somebody produces a drug, that drug doesn't change. Yes, there's different people that will take it and it will react differently to different people, but you're absolutely right, Alison, that you can't. It's very, very difficult to do that in a fast-moving environment, and especially the last 3 months have been exceptionally fast-moving. My tech team have not stopped, and that there's tweaks and adaptations, and so you can never run that sort of product. But I think the metrics that schools typically understand and use day to day, the ones that mean something to them, the ones that mean something to their SLT, they're the ones that they're going to be, let's say, that are going to be highlighted to. So then they know what will work, and if you can map onto that and put your product against that, and can evidence it through, which is exactly what we do. That means something to them. Based on that, they can then make a decision as to whether they're going to continue with a subscription or whether it doesn't work for them, and that's fine. It doesn't work for every school, every setting. So I think people have to be honest with that. But I think the main thing is that in people looking for evidence, just be aware of the limitations of the research you plan to do, whatever it is. And you can't do a perfect piece of research, but just be pragmatic about it. And as I think Dan alluded to earlier, show it, sort of visualize it so people can see what it is that you're calling evidence.
Yeah, and interestingly, one of the richest piece of well done research is case study, because it really shows one school to another school how they did it. And nearly always that is the missing bit of information when you start to think about implementing new ed techs. Well, let's see if we have any questions pop up on the screen with the magic wonderful. Hello, Jen. Nice to have you in the session. So Jen's posed the question: what are the barriers to ed tech publishing remote learning COVID-19 evidence, and how could it be overcome? Would we support a mandated minimum open data set to get access to the state education sector? Very interesting. So let's take those in two parts, please. So barriers to actually publishing or sharing your stories, or getting that evidence out there, if you were lucky enough to have something ready to go. Michael, let me put that one to you first.
I don't know if there are any barriers. I think just get it out there. For me, it's just ultimate transparency in everything you do. Like the context in which you've captured your evidence, whether it's robust or not, share it. This is what we're doing with EdTech Impact. We're trying to show who is using the product. So it's not, like I say, it's not just Joe blogs in this school. I want to know, I can contact Joe. I know his role in the school. I know how frequently he uses it. I know his competency of using the product or using technology. I know how frequently he uses it. I know that his school is quite deprived. I know there's X number of pupils on free school meals or number of pupils on SEN SEND. So, sorry, not really answering the question, but I just don't think there's anything holding us back. And I think people are nervous to get stuff out there because it's not perfect, it's not shiny. How will it go down? I think it's about building trust now. We're in very uncertain times. There's a real lack of trust. Politicians have not helped. There was a lack of trust around EdTech purchasing prior to COVID. That's been amplified now. So my view is just get it out there.
Yeah. So can I move to Dan? I mean, you're a company that has published in an academic sense, as well as stuff that you make available on websites. Do you have a thought on that?
I think it's really important. I mean, as you said, we're kind of the exception, and it's just a function of the time we've been doing it. We've done double-blind RCTs at large volume tests before. We've started to work with independent organizations, academic institutions, to make sure that we've got independent validation of what we're doing. But there's no harm in just getting it right before you go live. I mean, I appreciate the startup world is different. Early stage EdTech companies, we've got our new product, Numerize, which is a parent-facing product for independent learning. It's not going to be commercially live till the 1st of September, by which stage I think we'll have about 2 million questions attempted, which means we spent the time to understand what the engagement is, what's driving the engagement. It won't be providing us oodles of evidence, but it starts to drive engagement and behavior. And from my perspective, if you can get that right and publish, there's nothing stopping you publishing. I think people need to be very, very wary of that. And one of the points raised earlier was, how do early stage small companies do this? Well, when you're out there raising money, my advice would be the first money you raise from investors, tell them it's not for sales, it's for evidence. If you have evidence, you will drive revenues. If you drive revenues, you become, say, sustainable and renewed business. If you don't have the evidence, you can throw as much money as you want to the front end of the business. It won't do you any good. So you have to invest in evidence, not only the schools for their learners, but EdTech companies for kind of sustainability. And I think COVID-19 has accentuated that real search for investing as a learner, as a school, into something that makes a difference. And I think, if anything, it's highlighted how relevant EdTech is, but also that you have to be really picky and choosy, because you can throw a lot of money away, which unfortunately will not get back.
Wonderful point there. So I think we are unfortunately out of time. Obviously, it's my favourite subject this year's webinar. I could stay on all night and talk to you about it. But we do need to move on to the next set of panellists. So Michael, Anthony and Dan, thank you so much for your contribution.
Thank you.
If I can invite participants to keep those questions going in the chat, because I know that everyone will be keen to follow up the questions after the event. And we'll move now to our third panel, and I'm really delighted that we've got John and Murray and Sam, and they'll introduce themselves probably in a moment. But I've got a successful company. I've got hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of users. Why do I need to worry about evidence? I mean, the writing's there; it's clear. So let's have a think about how we've got our three panelists here, their views on that. So let me go to Sam first, Sam, because I'm delighted to see another woman in the event. I have to say. Hi. So yes, Sam, Wiz Education. You'd like to tell us a little bit about?
Yeah, I certainly will. Hello, my name is Sam Cooper. I'm head of UK for Wiz Education. Wiz Education, we're a global EdTech company, and we've been around for about 15 years, I think just over 15 years. What we have is a virtual platform of a maths tutor, which tailors lessons specifically to individuals' needs and ability levels specifically.
Okay, so the word tutor in there stuck out. I think we'll ask you a little bit more of that in a moment. Thank you. And in terms of the evidence base that you're sitting on and the research that you're doing, I mean, do you have a view on why even the big successful companies might need to engage in research for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about the evidence now, isn't it? It's to make an informed decision. A lot of it otherwise is concept. So you're trying to make a decision on a concept. And it's even more difficult to see. I mean, I've worked in publishing backgrounds for many years, and you will be able to show them something tangible. With EdTech, the difference is you actually are selling a concept. So when you do that, you need that evidence. You need that evidence base to be able to show that actually what they're going to get is a return on their investment and the outcomes that they're actually looking for, those learning outcomes that they're looking for. So we need to be able to demonstrate that, as my other colleagues have said online, that we need to be able to demonstrate that in order to be even have a viable conversation with educators to be able to talk about how we can support them.
Thank you very much. So moving to, let's go to Murray next. Hello, Murray. Tell us a little bit about SMI and your thoughts on why successful companies should bother.
Well, I'm not sure we'd describe ourselves as a successful company completely yet. We're always trying to improve what we're doing, and I guess that's the heart of it, really. TASMI is a formative assessment tool, an adaptive learning program that allows students to do individual practice and build their knowledge base, build their confidence in their knowledge through daily practice. But it also provides a very rich, detailed data set for teachers and parents to use to find out exactly where their children need more support and plan their intervention. So it's used as a great sort of accelerator of learning and labour-saving device, and allowing teachers to really spend their time on the teaching and intervention rather than repetition of facts. But in terms of the job of a company that maybe is quite well established and seems to have pretty irrefutable evidence of impact, well, we continually do research because we're always trying to improve our product. We're always trying to find out where it's going to work best and for whom, and obviously improve the way it can affect outcomes for students that it perhaps serves less well. So we wanted the strapline always learning for us, but it seems like Pearson got there first. But that's in the spirit of what we're doing. I mean, I started Taskmy literally as a card game, and it's evolved into a tech product from there. But it was only by iterating on the system with my students and learning how they learned and learning how to improve it that we even turned it into a tech platform in the first place. Now we have, I don't know, something like 2 million questions being answered on the platform daily, and that's just in science. So as we expand to maths and English next year, we expect to see that significantly increase. We have an enormous amount of data, and I feel a responsibility to inspect that data, see how we can make the product better, but also hopefully open out to the community of educators and other tech companies as to what's working and why and in what contexts, in order to help everyone in this environment improve what they're doing, including ourselves.
Mm-hmm. No, interesting. And just relating it back to the question I think that Jen asked at the end of the last panel around this notion of even open data and much more sort of interoperability and data moving between companies as well as between government, schools, or whatever. I think that's something we might explore at the end, because it clearly everybody's got a little piece of a child's story. However, wouldn't it be a richer picture of the child if we somehow saw it from their perspective, which is another sort of revolution waiting to happen, if you like. So coming to John next. Afternoon, John. Tell us a little bit about Pobble and your take on the theme of this panel.
Hi, Alison. So Pobble is an EdTech platform supporting the teaching of writing in primary. So we provide tools to make the teaching of writing easier for teachers, everything from planning great lessons, finding good content, through children being able to kind of look at other children's writing and understand what good writing looks like, how they can improve their own writing, or aspire to use new vocabulary or new ideas in their work. They can then submit their work back to the teacher and engage in peer-to-peer feedback, sort of structured peer-to-peer feedback in a way of really helping them to understand, what they've done well, what they could improve on, etc. And then we also have tools to help with assessment and moderation. Assessment of primary writing is, particularly challenging because it's very subjective and it requires a lot of teacher-to-teacher discussion. And so we have a tool to help teachers to do that online.
Okay, and you used the word teacher an awful lot in there. Now, I just have to ask, how have you coped with the fact that teachers haven't been in schools working in the same ways over the last 2-3 months?
Well, yeah, it's been a really fascinating period of time, and actually the question about that sort of led this particular discussion about if this works, people are making progress. Why do we need to track anything? Well, I think the last couple of months have really demonstrated why, because the entire context has changed. And it's interesting, if you'd spoken to me 6 months ago, perhaps I would have led with a more pupil-focused description of what Pobble does. But for the last few months, at least, it's been all about, for us, giving teachers the tools to be able to continue to teach writing. And it's quite interesting. We've been running a lot of Twitter polls recently just to get feedback from teachers as to what they're thinking about things. And just to give you an example, 60% of teachers said that writing at primary level was going to be the hardest hit by this remote environment, because of course reading, people can read books. Maths, you can have adaptive platforms that work quite very effectively in a sort of independent learning environment. But getting children to actually independently write with parents supporting is really, really challenging. And so we've had to make quite a number of adjustments to what we do and how we support teachers, and then of course parents with the teaching of writing at home, making sure it's really focused around driving engagement of pupils.
And thoughts around sort of the long-term picture in terms of evidence in school, and perhaps Sam, I can bring you in a little bit more, because quite intrigued to know a little bit about what the relationship is with the tutoring platform. And again, I take back this sort of child-centric view of how does the information that might be sitting in WIS, does that get back to schools, teachers? How does it fit in with that whole
Yeah,
chart?
it really does. So we work on two levels, actually. We work directly with schools and maths, but we also work directly with parents. So we've got a home subscription as well of the same tutoring platform. So it's very much, and we kind of work on a principle of a triangle of success, that parents and at home are an absolute key part of the dynamics and the success. So within our platforms, we have parent dashboards as well as teacher dashboards, so they can see that evidence, and that's worked really well for us over the summer. I think in some ways it's probably been underutilised and not really seen its potential up until now. So like everyone else is saying, we've been particularly busy at this time, but also we've seen the levels of engagement really rocket, and parents' engagement really high as well. So they've wanted to know more. We've done parental tutorials that they've attended. We've shown them how to access their dashboards that have been there a long time, but they've just not, even though we've tried to communicate it, they've not really accessed them. And the teachers' dashboards have been absolutely critical through this period because they can't really see the learning taking place. So they're using the platform which reports back in live data time. They can see the level of engagement, the time spent on it, progress they've made. So that's been really important. And I can see that being, even when schools are back in September, an absolutely integral part of any blended approach that they've got. I think it's really allowed us to be able to come to the forefront where we've probably been seen more as an intervention tool or something to use with either lower ability pupils, when that's not the case. You know, personalised learning is about an individual learning journey for each child. So it's really has come into its own. It's been thrown into that position with the situation that happened. So
interesting. So we are moving towards the end, and we will take some questions before I begin to wrap things up. But I think, you know, if you're out there and you're not at what we'd call an evidence-informed EdTech company, how on earth do you become one? I mean, it doesn't happen overnight. What are some of the steps you can take as an organisation to start to build either your in-house capacity or an understanding of how even to get started? So let me go to John first on this one. How do you do it?
Yeah, so well, we believe very much in co-creation. So, you know, there were 4 founders of Pobble, 3 of which were teachers. So Pobble came from the classroom. But actually, it's been very interesting working as part of the Nesta EdTech Innovation Fund, so DFE's fund. We're working on a project with them, developing our sort of pupil tools further. And one of the requirements of the grant was to go out and test this in, you know, there was sort of specific requirements. It has to be tested in 100 classes this term. And it was quite interesting. At first we were like, well, you know, we're going to do all the testing and do the right things. But actually having that like actual written requirement to go and get written, documented, tested evidence of it being used in classes at the prototype stage has been fantastic. And anyone can do that. Anyone can go and co-create with schools. You know, there are lots of schools out there that are interested in working with people to solve the problems that they have. And I think sometimes, you know, companies, particularly if they're not teacher founded, there's a kind of nervousness for people to go out there and actually engage with schools. So I'm a great believer in co-creation. And now all of those people that tested the prototype become our first, you know, couple of 100 schools that are going to be using the product from September, you know, in order to give us that feedback to make sure that what we built is actually going to work for them. And that's then just a continuous cycle. Once that's embedded in and you've got cores of people wanting to always be inputting and you're always asking for that feedback, then that whole journey is sort of self-proliferating.
That sounds interesting. Thank you. And let me come to Sam.
Yeah, I would say that you need to understand the problems that educators are facing, and you need to validate those problems as well. You need to make sure that you've understood them correctly in order to be able to work with them, as John said, to be able to create things. So the first steps really is understanding the challenges that they're facing and how EdTech and technology can actually help those, where perhaps even better than we've been able to do previously. So for me, it is about understanding the market and co-creating, as John says.
Interesting. And to you, Murray, I mean, that whole research journey, what's it been for Tass and I?
Well, as I said earlier, I started building my platform with my own students and measuring the impact as it went along, constantly iterating on the process, even when it was in the kind of paper and ink stage. And I would absolutely echo what Sam and John have said here about, there are plenty of schools, teachers, and students who will happily collaborate with you to work to develop your product. And we're all in the business of learning, and it's a spirit of curiosity kind of approach that people will want to engage with you on that. As you get a little bit more mature, if you have a tech stack and you're having data coming through the system, there's a wealth of other learning you can be doing by inspecting that data. And it may not solely be about educational outcomes, because that is hard to do. You need to gather results or integrate with MISs and all sorts of complicated things to do that. But you can measure all kinds of aspects about the way your app is performing from just data you're collecting inherently. I actually think a lot of the data that we gather internally and use for our internal research is more valid in a lot of cases than things like prior attainment statistics that are often quite unreliable or compromised by other factors that we can't control for. So we do lots of internal study and data science, if you like. It's pretty ground where we can't afford a data scientist, but we do a lot of it. Looking at our own internal measures of prior attainment, the beginning of usage and then at the end. So we do pre and post testing of wide cohorts of users. We also simply measure times of peak activity so that we can make sure our tech stack is able to handle demand, or whether certain button placements or calls to action are going to drive better engagement with something that we know is effective. So Alison, because we worked together on, or you reviewed our research paper on our video impact trial, we know from a large randomized trial, with a control trial, that our video intervention, things like these things I do on Blackboard, have a direct effect on student attainment and retention. We did that in an incredibly cheap, lean way and gathered enough data to see that there was something to it. But then we look at how we can engage students in watching those videos. We know they have an impact. Now we're going to just move buttons around or change the timing of the prompts and so on to make sure students engage with that thing that we know is valuable. Those are things that companies, even at the very startup stage, can do quite cheaply in a lean fashion before they invest too much time in product development. And that research-led product development is at the heart of what makes, I think, good EdTech stand up. So engaging in that is something that can be done really from the early stages.
Thank you very much indeed. Now we've got just a minute or two to see if we have any questions to pop up on the screen. Yes, so we have the question, do EdTech companies someone in-house who understands the discipline of collecting and doing research? So let me go back to, let's go back to John on that one. So do you need in-house this research expertise, or can you just outsource it?
So I would argue that you need the vision and the mission to become, evidence focused. That has to be in-house. That has to be in everybody in the team. They have to believe that that is the right way to build a business. I think the actual discipline of collecting research, we went through the UCL Educate process, and that was fantastic because it gave us access to, professional researchers, some of the best in the world. And Alison, of course, you helped pobble through that. And that's what helped us to have an additional level of discipline. And actually, at one point, we took on a part-time researcher from UCL who was super helpful in actually enabling us to design a robust study for what we were looking at that point. But I think the key thing here is that the actual, research discipline doesn't have to be in-house, but the mission to be research and evidence-led does have to be in-house, very much as part of everyone in the team.
Thank you very much. And we are right on the end of time. As I say, it's such a shame to end this because I honestly feel that the topic is worthy of further discussion. But just to wrap up, I think there's several things that have really come to the fore here. We've got this weird moment in history where EdTech is suddenly under the microscope. It's flavor of the month. It's the solution to many educational problems right now, as well as creating some of its own. But there's this huge amount of data flying around, and how can we, and that's a global we, all researchers like myself, the companies, the schools, the parents, the teachers, all sort of bring together the collective knowledge to try to certainly evaluate what's going on right now in some way, if only to understand how to be better prepared if and when situations like this arise again. So, you know, data as evidence is one thing, but I think the other key thing here is that, you know, becoming an EdTech company that is research-minded isn't an overnight thing. It needs to come from the founders. My PhD student, Anissa Mooney, is finishing her dissertation on just that topic, which we'll share widely with the Evidence Group when it's out. But the need for the real critical drive for research strategy to be inherent in the vision of the founders. And you need to allocate funds to that at some point. Now, early days, you might not have it, but you know, there are ways of building the skill set, accessing resources. And I know the EdTech Evidence Group has really positioned itself to be a go-to place for the EdTech industry to access resources, share practice, and really sort of crowdsource within the industry the sort of evidence that is going to be useful out there in the wider world. So many thanks to our 9 panelists. It's been great catching up with you and hearing particularly how you're coping over the last 9 months or so. The website is there for the EdTech Evidence site. The Twitter hashtag is there. Keep in touch, reach out, and stay safe, everybody. Thank you very much indeed.